Welcome, everyone. I hope you can hear me. So my name is Serge van Gessel. I'm the team coordinator for the GeoEnergy team. And in this session, we are going to see a presentation, short presentation of the 6 projects we have done in our team. And I, first of all, would like to invite Stefan Knopf and Niels Schofbo, who will present 3D Geo Europe and GeoERA. Please go ahead, Stefan and Niels.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Stefan Knopf. And by the way, if you have any questions to the presentations, please write into the Q&A chat and we will pick them up later to answer them. So the title of the first combined presentation of today is From Cross-Border Harmonization of 3D Geomodels to Geoenergy Resource Assessments, presented by the project 3D GeoEU and GeoERA. So let's start with 3D GeoEU. That stands for 3D Geomodeling for Europe. The main focus of the project is the context that 3D subsurface information is often inconsistent across border. That means it exhibits so-called border discontinuities. This image here is an example of such a border discontinuity in regard of the depths of one geological horizon. You can see along the border there is a discontinuity. There it doesn't fit. There is a difference. It could be a few hundred meters. And of course, such border discontinuities hamper reliable cross-border assessments of subsurface georesources in such a region. If you want to do reliable cross-border assessments, then also the geological base data, like 3D geomodels, should be consistent across the borders. And in our project, 3D GeoEU, the partners have tested and optimized methods and workflows for the harmonization of cross-border 3D geomodels. So right at the beginning, the 11 partners from 7 countries had set up various work areas as showcases where they could test cross-border harmonization and also do cross-border harmonization, but also other geomodeling topics as well. And in the following, I just show you a few impressions of the created cross-border 3D geomodels. So let's start with the first. This is a consistent 3D model of the cross-border region between the Netherlands and the German state of Lower Saxony. This is here. The model consists of 10 horizons, of Cenozoic and Mesozoic layers. And if you go now to the east, we have a harmonized 3D geomodel of the cross-border region between Poland and the German states of Brandenburg and Mecklenburg, Western Pomerania. This model consists of 8 horizons from the Upper Permian to the Cenozoic. Now let's go offshore to the Dutch, German, and Danish North Sea sectors, where we had also various work areas. And for this work example, for this work here in this region, I've just included here an overview of the results. And all these results, these are reports and digital data, just reflect the various work steps that are necessary to finally achieve a harmonized depth model in a cross-border region. Yeah, for example, you have to start to cover the state of the art in the region, what's already there. You have to harmonize stratigraphy. You have to harmonize seismic stratigraphic concept, but also creating a harmonized cross-border velocity model before you then finally come to a harmonized 3D geomodel of this Entenschnal region here in the North Sea, marked in yellow. It consists of 8 horizons, also from the Upper Permian to the Cenozoic. And to just give you an impression of how successful the harmonization was, I included here some before-after comparisons. Here on the left, this is a geological horizon, a top unit of the base Upper Jurassic between the Dutch, German, Danish North Sea sectors. Here in the dotted line, I hope you can see it, is the political border, and this is a border discontinuity. You can see it's not natural, and after the harmonization, it looks now more natural. And on the right, we have here a seismic cross-section with interpreted layers here in various colors, and the black line is the border area, and you can see clearly the border discontinuities from here to here, from here to here, from here to here. And after our work, it is now fine. It's a clear improvement of the situation in this area. So in addition to cross-border harmonization, the partner also tackled other geomodeling topics or questions. And one thing was, what about if you want to create a subsurface 3D geomodel in an area with scarce subsurface information, where you only have a few wells, only have a few seismic? Then an option might be to use potential field geophysical data, in particular gravimetrics, and then together with classical structural geology techniques, use it as quick, cost-effective, and efficient methods for 3D geomodeling. So the partners developed and tested a workflow that uses also gravimetric data. They tested it, for example, in this area of the Western Pyrenees, an area where scarce information and even the gravimetric data is not enough, so they went to the field and they acquired new gravimetric data, and that was proved it's cost efficient, it's much more cheaper than drilling wells or doing seismic campaigns, and uses additional gravimetric data, and all the data was available to create finally a 3D geomodel of the Western Pyrenees area. So another topic or another question we have, what about uncertainties of geomodels? You know, geomodels always look so pristine, so nice, and there is an idea in the public that 3D geomodels are as precisely as, for example, 3D models of buildings that architects use. But we do not know the subsurface as precisely. So these models have uncertainties, and to raise awareness on the uncertainties or want to communicate uncertainties, you could visualize the uncertainties. This is an example here. So in the project, we did a research to cover the state of the art and uncertainty visualization. That was right at the beginning. Then we also compiled and discussed what are the sources of uncertainty in 3D models. Here, the partners from the pilot areas, from the work areas, could bring in the expertise and their experiences, and then we have compiled it into this comprehensive report. Also, the partners could compile some example data. They put it into the European Geological Data Infrastructure Database, so the EGDI. So the data could be pulled from there, the models. And if you want to test visualization, you can use a software prototype that was developed in the project. So before we already come to the final slide, just want to give you once an overview of the result of products. Again, we have created a lot of 3D geomodels or several geomodels in several areas of Europe, but we also created 2D maps, for example, thickness maps, but also harmonized bouquet maps. And then the work and the results are in detail documented in more than 20 technical scientific reports, which are all available on the GeoERA 3D GeoU webpage. So now let's go to the final slide for 3D Geo. So I think the results and the lessons learned from this project provide already advice on how cross-border geomodel harmonization could be done. We have created various 3D European areas, and they could already be used for assessments of subsurface resources. They can also be used as examples or keystones for further transnational development. So the topic of cross-border harmonization is important, we believe, and it should be further promoted in order to ultimately achieve the goal of the harmonized geological database across Europe. And now, how one of these 3D geomodels we have created, how it can be used for geoenergy resource assessments will now be shown, among other things, in the following GeoERA presentation by Niels Skovsbo. So Niels, please take over. I will stop sharing. Niels?
Yes, thank you very much. I assume I'm on and you can see my screen now. I will continue now with the GeoERA part of this joint presentation. Let me see here. And the GeoERA stands for the Geological Analysis and Resource Assessment of Selected Hydrocarbon Systems. And why we did this project was that we wanted to map out potential new European gas sources that can contribute in the transition from coal, and to enable the transition from hydrocarbon extraction to offshore energy storage for the North Sea, and also to promote green energy solutions for the North Sea area. And also we wanted to assess new gas deposits as the gas hydrates and their potential geohazards along the European margin. So what we, in fact, we wanted to solve is that we wanted to assess and present a harmonized assessment and maps of the North Sea oil and gas resources. And we want to present the knowledge gaps that exist for mapping and understanding of the gas hydrates along the European margins. And some of the key elements that we developed is that a scientific based status of where and how much hydrocarbon that the North Sea holds, and also a catalog of future use of the subsurface with respect to data, knowledge, models, and infrastructures such as field pipelines and platforms to show future uses of the North Sea. This is just an example of how we use one of the 3D models that Stefan just presented. This is the 3D model that is within the Danish, German, and Dutch part of the North Sea. We use this state-of-the-art geomodel is to use to present the geological development and assess the hydrocarbon in place in this area. And we calculated, for instance, the main source rock transformation from kerogen to oil. And these kind of resource assessments can be used for evaluating where and how much oil and gas is present. But it can also be used to evaluate other usage of the North Sea, for instance, the storage capacity and the diagenesis that the reservoirs has undergone. So this has multiple uses, these models in the North Sea. We also made maps of and presented harmonized conventional clay maps where most likely the conventional oil and gas is present. This is shown in the map to the left. And we also present harmonized unconventional clay maps and a new assessment of this potential gas resource in the North Sea area. And this shows for the first time a harmonized map view of where hydrocarbons is most likely present in the North Sea. And this is maps that directly feed into government, inform government in licensing rounds and planning of the North Sea, and also for industry exploration programs, but certainly also for alternative use of the subsurface areas and in all subsurface evaluations, either if you want to have a most use of, or you want to find hydrocarbons, or you don't want to find hydrocarbons if you're exploiting for storage sites in the North Sea. We made also an assessment of the conventional resources and also the unconventional resources present in the North Sea. In the diagram to the top is shown a collated and harmonized assessment of the conventional resources based on national assessments. These were harmonized and collated together, and we present what is produced historically, but also what is present currently as reserves and consequent resources and yet to find. These forms about energy security and about future use of in the North Sea. We also, for the unconventional resource, we developed what is called the YOGA method, which is a further development of a previous European project where we assess the onshore areas. We use this method and present for the first time an assessment of the potential unconventional gas and oil resource in the North Sea areas. Protocols like such assessments is something that can be used also for other fields of interest. For instance, for assessing the storage capacity or the energy storage capacities for that. So these protocols and collated assessments has multiple uses, both within oil and gas, but certainly also for the green energy transition and for evaluating the North Sea with that respect. Also, as a bridging the transition, we mapped the European gas hydrate, the knowledge gaps, and also the potential geohazards connected with the gas hydrates. To the left, you can see a map about where do we actually have positive indications from gas hydrates, being either samples or maps based on physical chemical modeling. Which shows that the presence is all around actually the margins of the European margin, so to speak, and within the Mediterranean. And to the left, or to the right, you can see with different colors where the gas hydrates likelihood of dissociation is either low, moderate, or high. This shows where gas hydrates is likely to be dissociated, and that can foster geohazards. And this is one of the first maps that actually shows this potential, or this map potential. As the last thing that we did in the GeoERA project was that we want to map out what the future of the North Sea holds in terms of data, structures, and knowledge that we have. This diagram, this matrix to the left, shows that We have mapped out synergies between different alternative uses like storage capacities of CO2 or hydrogen storage, and where there are potential synergies or competition. And we think that this map and analysis of the North Sea area is directly fostering or feeding into evaluating of the green transition for the North Sea, and is further developing and feeding into the political system. So with these words, I would like to say thank you for listening to the GeoERA project. And if you have questions, then please add them into the question and answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niels and Stefan. So we will now go ahead with the next two projects, MUSE and Hotline, which are presented by Gregor Gutzel, Cornelia Steiner, and Gerald Diepolder. We will do all the questions at the end of the session. So I think, Gregor, you will start. Please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Serge. So welcome also from my side. I'll give you a very brief introduction. For the sake of time, I will keep it short. So we are looking at the geothermal heat inside the GeoEnergy thematic group in GeoERA. And why it is important? Of course, it's an emerging technology, although it's very old. As you can see on the fact box on the right-hand side, the first geothermal district heating system was invented in the medieval age in France. So it's not a new technology, but still it covers a very low share inside the heating and cooling market. And the interesting thing is that geothermal energy is a real multitasker. You can do heating, cooling, electricity, and heat storage. But there are a lot of barriers still we have to address. Please click, Cornelia. Thank you. And one of them, which are in our duty, is of course access to information, uncertainties, and investment of risks. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we are in GeoERA, we're looking at two, let's say, very important market sectors inside geothermal energy. On the one hand, with MUSE, please click on the shallow geothermal systems. So of course, mostly individual buildings, but we thought we go one step further in GeoERA and we look at shallow geothermal in urban areas. So where it goes in a broader spectrum. For instance, including cooling, seasonal heat storage, low temperature heating, cooling networks, and urban areas. They are, of course, the major share of the European population, and there bear more challenges than individual use on the countryside. In addition to shallow geothermal, we are looking at deep geothermal, especially hydrogeothermal using natural thermal water. And the Hotline project was looking at a specific type of reservoir rocks, carbonates, in a, let's say, pan-European overview. And that was all from my side for the introduction. And I'm pass the word now to my colleague Cornelia. Thanks. Cornelia, we cannot hear you.
Sorry for that. I hope it works now.
And just for your information, we have about 10 minutes extra to the session end time that is indicated. So please go ahead, Cornelia.
Yes, I will keep it short, but I would like to present you a little bit the results of the MUSE project. So shallow geothermal energy is our topic here, and this has a high potential to decarbonize heating and cooling in general. It's a very stable energy source and is available almost everywhere. And you can use it with a broad variety of systems. And in fact sheets, we summarized state-of-the-art concepts that all use shallow geothermal energy. In our further work, we also focused a little bit more on borehole heat exchangers and on groundwater heat exchangers. Those are the two most common types that are used in Europe. But why did we choose to focus on urban on the urban setting, because more than 75% of Europe's population live here. So we have a high population density that comes with a high demand for heating and cooling, and with a high number of subsurface installations. The energy transition is also an important point in cities, and so we can expect increasing numbers of installations in the underground, which might lead to a higher thermal impact on the underground. So in order to be able to use shallow geothermal energy in future in a sustainable and efficient way, it is necessary that we have subsurface management. Some European countries already use shallow geothermal energy into a very high degree, for example, Sweden, but also Austria and Denmark. And then we have countries with emerging markets. And for the MUSE consortium, we worked together with countries that represent all different market stages. They are marked here in red. So this allowed us that we consider the different needs and to share experiences from the different countries. At the beginning, we looked for all barriers and challenges that restrain a more widespread application of shallow geothermal energy. So for example, there is a lack of a common definition of shallow geothermal energy, and some countries don't have a legal definition of this technology, and some legal frameworks are rather complicated with time-consuming licensing procedures. To get a better overview of the current legal framework and all the procedures and related policies, we summarized all this information in a report. And then based on this analysis, we derived a guideline how to manage the use of shallow geothermal energy in an efficient way in urban areas. And in this second report, we propose adaptive management circles that can facilitate the use of shallow geothermal energy. In our participating countries, we also had some other activities. The pilot areas we selected are located in 14 cities, and they have all different socioeconomic settings and different climatic and geological conditions. You can find more information about the pilot areas in fact sheets, and then we also compiled all our activities the work in the pilot areas focused on focused on investigating where we can use shallow geothermal energy and to what extent. And in order to achieve this, we conducted a lot of field measurements for the course over 2 years and collected data from existing data sets and archives. And then we looked for methods and workflows, how we can actually quantify the resources. And we found effective methods and also developed new ways to estimate the resources, for example, the heat extraction rate for borehole heat exchangers. And in this catalog of evaluated methods, we summarize all the methods that we applied in the pilot areas. And this is now a very good example, a good collection of methods how you can derive and show resources for shallow geothermal energy that can be applied not only in our pilot areas, but also elsewhere in other European cities, but also beyond. So we derived a total of 156 output datasets for all pilot areas together, and they are all now publicly available on the EGDI platform. We also exchanged knowledge with other GeoERA projects and beyond, and had some targeted stakeholder communication to a little limited extent due to the pandemic. But we were also able to identify important aspects for a good and successful stakeholder communication for shallow geothermal energy that can also be applied in future projects. They are all summarized in this guideline. And last but not least, we published all our reports on the MUSE website that you can access. And from here, you can go to the MUSE web viewer on EGDI. You see our pilot areas here, and they are rather small because for the shallow geothermal energy, it is very important to go on a more detailed level, and the European point of view might oversimplify the status a little bit. So therefore, we decided to put our information not only into this big viewer, but into several smaller ones. So we have one additional viewer for each pilot area where you can explore the resources in more detail for each pilot area. With this web viewer, with this web system, we want to, of course, distribute the information to our stakeholders. So now you can actually zoom into your desired area and have a look what resources you can expect to use shallow geothermal energy. And this setup should also serve as an example for future platforms about shallow geothermal energy. This was a very brief overview of what we achieved in MUSE, and now I would like to hand over to Gerold to tell us more about Hotline.
Okay, thank you very much, Cornelia. I try to share my screen first and hope you can. I hope you can see it and you can hear me well.
Yes, we can see it, but it is not in presentation mode. Yeah,
that's what I changed now. Okay, thank you again, Cornelia, for the transition. So with the next presentation, we move from the shallow subsurface to the deep subsurface, both on the geothermal energy. And the principal difference between the two levels is in the deep subsurface, hard data are much less abundant than they are in the shallow subsurface. And the other thing is any geothermal installation, it's much more costly than in the shallow subsurface. So the approach is a bit different to MUSE, and you can see the consortium down here. And just by the way, my name is Gerold Diepolder, and once upon a time I used to be the project leader of Hotline. Now I'm trying to be retired, but it doesn't work very well. Okay, so the mapping and assessment of geothermal plays we focused on the deep carbonate rocks because deep carbonate rocks are the most prevalent geothermal aquifers of low enthalpy system. And you see it on the map, that's the surface distribution. If you also take the subsurface, the areas where carbonates are present are much larger. And why we did all these efforts? As I said before, exploration and development of the deep subsurface is a high-risk investment. It's very expensive, and particularly if you go to low enthalpy systems, which require drilling depths of more than 3 kilometers. And across Europe, the deep carbonate vectors has received relatively little attention because the carbonate rocks are preserved tight. But we know from some areas which are turned out to be kind of a geothermal bonanza, this is not the full truth. But to de-risk the geothermal exploration, we have to improve our understanding of the generic geological controls to get these areas more interesting for investors and for geothermal installations in general. As I said before, hard data are few, so our efforts has the basic approach of how to deal with these areas is best pictured with C bullets. So it's first of all sharing knowledge and experience of the areas under investigation, comparing the well-investigated and unexplored areas. This cross-fertilization has been very successful during the first half of the project, as you can see on the left, but it has been rather constrained in the second half. This collaboration allowed for a consistent characterization and assessment using common parameters and applying the best practice uniformly over all the areas where you see on the right. So we tried to show all the areas with the same parameters, with the same color keys and so on. But later on, when I come to the results, this ended up in a consistent presentation for easy comparability and the collation and combination of results for a comprehensive knowledge base which can be used also beyond the 11 case study areas. So one of the principal outcomes of our investigations was the geothermal base assessment. We used the heat in place method, which was invented or was developed by the United States Geological Service and reported by Maffra and Cataldi, but with later revisions. I don't want to go into detail with this formula. I just want to show what we had to investigate to get the results. First of all, the volume, which we did with work package 2, the mapping and characterization of the reservoirs. When we had to know something about the temperature, the temperature within the reservoir, and we have to calculate, subtract what the reinjection areas temperatures later to that. Sorry. And then we have to know anything about the mean reservoir properties, which are mainly the permeability and the physical properties. The later one, we had to use mainly literature values because there are only very few measurements of the area itself. And we applied this method for 2 different reinjection temperatures. One is the 18 degree, which is the ambient temperature plus 10 degrees. That's an approach from Limburger, which he used worldwide, and 50 degrees, which is the usual reinjection temperature after power production. One example for an area, so that's the difference between the 18 degree reference temperature and the 50 degree temperatures. You see, it shrinks, the area, the interesting area shrinks with a higher reinjection temperature. But still, this area, which is about 35,000 square kilometers, it's got a stored heat of more than 2 million petajoules. That's a big number. It's a 1 by the power of 15. It's better to understand when you take compare it. The total energy consumption of Germany in 2018 was 13,000 petajoules. So, but we have to be aware this method only delivers the maximum theoretical extractable heat energy in the reservoir. So in the reservoir pyramid, we are still on the lowest level, and with further investigations, the recoverable energy might shrink. On the other hand, this is just a bulk assessment and disregards the fault zones, because we know from the porosity fault zones are much more water, or let's say fluid, than the host rock, and these areas are such feature a higher heat in place, but we couldn't quantify this on the scales we are working, and due to the lack of hard data for the fault properties. So our results ended up in one big result, the all-in-one hyperlinked synopsis of the hotlines results, which is the Geothermal Atlas. It includes maps of the different areas, thematic maps of the different areas, cross sections of these areas. We've also all linked to a vocabulary where all the features are explained. It's linked to the reports, and it also contains fact sheets to further illustrate what we are doing and why we have doing it. And of course, all the map layers are in the EGI and with the metadata. I best show you this with an example. And okay, Murphy allows today. This is a Geothermal Atlas, as you can find it on Hotline's webpage. It's just the usual intro. And then you come to this page, you can select an area. I take my home area, where you get the 4 principal informations. That's a heat in place distribution. We've got the gross thickness of the reservoir. We got the depth of the reservoir for 2 reasons. Once it defines the drilling depth, so the costs to reach the reservoirs. And on the other hand, it was the basis for temperature calculations in areas we didn't have real temperature measurements, so we had to use the geothermal gradient. And last not least, that's a resulting temperature map we produced for all the areas. These 4 maps, or these for thematic maps, are with all in all areas. And if you want to have further information, you just click on it. For example, why there is a hole in there, you get to the vocabulary. It says, okay, that's an impact crater where the reservoir rock is missing. And for example, this is this highlighted faults. You can click on it. You also get information on the faults. Some of them are illustrated. If you click on the cross section, you get a cross section where, again, I try to enlarge it. If you click, for example, on a fault in there, then you get a description of the fault. If you click on the unit, you get the information about the unit. Some of them are even illustrated, for example, like this, why at the southern end of the area we've got crisscrossing of faults because we are having two different levels. Let us go once back. You also got, for example, explanations like the fact sheet on the heat in place assessment. You got the link to the reports.
Gerald, can you conclude in a moment?
Yeah, I conclude immediately, because this is the best you can experience yourself. You just go to the Hotline website and click on the atlas, and you can do this all, see in detail. This is done for all the 11 areas, and I go back to my presentation. There's just one slide left. Okay, I've closed it all. The last slide just said that everything is in the website. Also, the GIS viewer is on the website where you can explore this, downloadable and queryable for each cell we did. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gerald and Gregor and Cornelia, for this great overview of geothermal research and resources that we have done in GeoERA. We will now go to the last two projects, and I will share my screen. Go to the right window. Share. So I hope you can see my screen. The next two projects will be presented by myself, Serge van Gessel, and by Renate Baus, the HIKE project and the GeoConnect 3D project. And starting with the HIKE project, which is aiming at building a knowledge base for hazard and impact research for Europe and providing databases that support that research. In HIKE, we have developed the first of its kind European fault database, and Gerald already showed what information we can gather about faults. But we also conducted 4 major case studies where we investigated novel methodologies to assess and evaluate hazards and impacts resulting from geoenergy uses like hydrocarbons production, geothermal, and storage of CO2 and energy. We also developed a knowledge share point where we can exchange tools and information about hazards and impacts. HIKE worked together with 19 partners, but we also collaborated with a lot of other projects on the specifications and provision of data. Why do we need fault data? Well, there's many reasons. First of all, faults have a very important geological relevance because they define the three-dimensional geological framework, but they also define how these resources like geothermal and hydrocarbons and storage capacities are distributed. And they define how the subsurface will behave and also the rock characteristics. They have important societal relevance with regards to safety, among others, because faults can generate natural and induced earthquakes, but they also represent potential pathways for leakage and migration, or they can result in ground motion and surface deformation. So you need to know where they are. And last but not least, they have economic relevance, among others, because they delineate hydrocarbon reservoirs or potential storage reservoirs for CO2 and energy. but they also are important to understand exploration risks, as Gerald explained. They represent hydrothermal resources and raw materials resources, and also they influence groundwater flow. So faults are present anywhere in the subsurface. They can be visible at the surface, but most of the faults are actually present at large depths where you cannot directly see them. So we have methodologies to see where these faults are and how they intersect with prospective intervals, like, for example, layers for geothermal resources or hydrocarbons and storage capacities. When we look at faults, it is one of the most important parts that we have done actually in the project is to develop a novel classification system for faults, which shows the dependencies between faults, which is used to correlate faults, and also shows how faults are related to geology. And this is the same like a stratigraphic framework for layers, but that didn't exist yet for faults, and that is what the HYEC project delivered. And HYEC, in its database, fault database, delivers also a data sets with comprehensive information about fault parameters and characteristics. So let's go quickly through the fault database. With our partners, we have been able to cover a large part of Europe with new fault information, which now includes more than 55,000 faults, with geometrical information about faults at different depth levels, which you can access through our portal on EGDI. And this has been really a novel development for many countries because this information was not disclosed before. We also assigned attributes to the faults. So what is the characteristics of faults? How do faults behave? When did they form? Or what is other types of information? And this information is, as much as possible, made Inspire compliant or standardized if that didn't exist yet. And you can, through the vocabulary system and keyword thesaurus, get information about these standards. Of course, if you show all the faults in the subsurface without any classification, you would just see a lot of faults, like in the left map. But if you apply a classification system, you can understand which fault systems are very important. You can understand their interdependency, and then you can also classify all the faults in between and know which faults are related to each other in the geological history. So you can understand much better what is the relevance of these faults for resources and hazards and impacts. All our partners have worked on developing national and regional vocabularies about each fault. So you can click a fault in the system and get more information about the definition of the fault, but also background references, and also understand where the fault is situated in the overall hierarchy of fault information. So understand where they are related, for example, to fault systems or smaller faults. This vocabulary system is also used as a robust tool to pragmatically and efficiently correlate faults across borders and different areas. Information just differs across borders. Some countries have a lot of information, other ones do not have that much information. So it's very difficult to make a very consistent 3D model of faults, but through our system, we can now link the faults across these borders and still know which belongs to what. Faults are mapped at different scale levels and levels of detail, and this is being done as well in the HYEC database. For example, in Germany, you have a regional, national model, but we have also incorporated data from the federal state geological surveys, which is more detailed and now also connected and linked to the national databases. So you can get multiple levels of detail if needed. We have also been able to interconnect our fault information with other databases, so you can click a fault and directly go to another reference and resource and get more and additional information about the fault. And this is, I think, a very novel and important tool to cross-connect our information. Last but not least, we have used the fault data for various, a total of 4 advanced hazard and impact case studies, which are deploying and developing novel and state-of-art methodologies for investigating seismicity, for example, resulting from hydrocarbon production, geothermal energy production or storage. But we also looked at projects that looked at the ground motion and surface deformation, for example, in Italy. We assessed studies on potential leakage and migration, assessing how faults can be a sealing or maybe a potential leakway for stored substances. So this is all included in our project website, where you can get all the reports about these studies, but also access all the fault information that we have and the background information about the standards that we have developed. So please visit the website. And with that, I would like to pass the words to Renate, who will show a bit more about how this information has been used.
Thank you, sir. Just to confirm if you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear.
Oh, perfect. Could you please stop sharing your screen so I can share my own? Thank you very much. Okay, I think you can see my screen now. So hello everyone, as Serge said before, my name is Renate Baus from the Geological Survey of Belgium, and I coordinated the GeoConnected project. And continuing from Serge's presentation, and as all of my colleagues already mentioned today, we're all working towards a low carbon future. And this will rely a lot on the subsurface, the resources and the uses that we can make use of. But really understanding what the subsurface is made of, what's the geometry, and what are the geological processes happening is essential to reach that goal. But the subsurface is not something easy to understand, as you've already seen by the complexity of the models and faults presented before. So imagine that we could take off a small part of our crust, up to some tens of kilometers deep, and rotate it to really visualize what's happening under our feet. I assure you this gets really, really complex. And as geologists, we of course are used to comprehend, but in a lot of detail, really just small parts of that story. And this means the geological knowledge is really fragmented by thematic and also by location. But of course, to make the best and most sustainable use of the subsurface, resources, and potential, we have to bring together information across different geodisciplines to consider the Earth system as a whole. And there comes GeoConnected. So our project developed a method to gather and display a variety of geological information in a simpler yet scientifically sound way. And the basic principle behind is that we can define the geological building blocks of the subsurface by first looking at geological structures. And these define or modify different types of geological units. And this allows us to have really a framework in which different types of geological data can be inserted, contextualized, and valorized. So I would now like to dive a bit into the resulting framework to show you how it is. So starting from a pan-European scale, we first define, as I said, the structures in the crust, because these are really key to understand the subsurface. They represent the limits to these geological building blocks. And in the image, you can see different types of structures represented by lines in different colors. So faults in red, plate boundaries in dark blue, etc., etc. And each of those actually separates specific geological realms and therefore also the resources and the potential of them. And our structural framework also incorporates something that is essential to discuss the subsurface, which is the uncertainty of mapped limits. In this case, so you can see in the image, they're represented by buffers around the lines. And the higher the buffer, the larger the uncertainty about the location of the specific limit. These structures then define the units that help us to discuss the resources and potential by theme. For example, you see there's some basins in yellow, origins in purple, etc., etc. But of course, scale matters. And for the structural framework, when we zoom in into specific regions, everything becomes more complex. So this multi-scale character helps us to keep the complexity contextualized and see knowledge across multiple scales. So just to show you an example, if we zoomed in into Ireland, we would see the Irish structural framework in different levels of complexity as well. And these different colors that show up represent different types of limits, units that are relevant to that scale, but of course all attached to the pan-European context. And this model is also helpful to cover areas crossing multiple countries, because these geological structures are really not bothered by geographic borders. So once again, we see an increasing complexity and richness of the information when zooming in. And just to go on the last pillar of this model, it also includes what we call geomanifestations, and these are really direct indicators of subsurface processes. And by indicating subsurface processes, we of course can link this to a variety of resources and potential. So this is just really a brief taste of what the structural framework that we built looks like. As Serge already said, all of this is really available on the website. And I think I will stress here that all of the projects that you've seen presenting, although it's very short, it was really unprecedented results that were only possible due to really joint work across Europe by the Geological Surveys. So I would just show you a very brief demonstration of the results of GeoConnected on the website, but this goes for all of the projects. So the website GeoERA.eu you might be already familiar with. On the tabs project, in this case, a GeoConnected example. In the project page, you have really all the results available. We're going into the structural framework, which is the EGDI map where our results are hosted. There is a menu on the left side where all the different layers are displayed. In GeoConnected, all of these are turned on by default because of the multi-scale functionality. The areas in black can be zoomed in to indicate where more detail is available. And there you can see really a lot of information. Might be a bit daunting at first, but every single element is clickable, and by hovering on the information in the pop-up table, you can see a lot of information attached to every single one of these geometries. And just to show something extra about geomanifestations, so for example, I think, so these quaternary volcanoes, for example, you see that the columns to the right, they have a concept URI column that links to the vocabulary, and this is standard for all GeoERA projects. When they have a project vocabulary, there's a definition of the concept, and also a repository column that links to all sorts of documents that are attached to it. In our case, there are lots of fact sheets and sometimes pictures about the geomanifestations. So this is how it looks like. Don't hesitate to explore the GeoERA website to see the results of all of the geoenergy projects and the other teams as well, of course. And with this, I end my presentation and thank you for your attention.
a lot, Renata. So yeah, we are still, I believe you have a few minutes of time, if I'm correct. I will ask you as organizer, but I believe in 5 minutes we need to go back to the central session where we see a presentation about EGDI. But I don't know if there's, I will look if there's any questions, but I will certainly have also one for myself. I saw a question about from Marina Kabidosh, and she asked how the theoretical heat energy was calculated. And maybe Gerald, I think this is also a question that was directed to you. Maybe you can give a short answer. I don't know, Gerald, if you are online.
Unmute my micro. So I answered already directly, also giving her a link where he can find to step in. But it's the heat in place method, which is was born in the 1970s by the USGS, and it's still used with some little changes or adaptations, but it still works, or it's still used for the first approach in reservoirs. So I think if she follows the link, she should get more information about what she needs.
Okay, thanks a lot. Maybe a question to Stefan. Maybe you can also highlight what would be the importance of your findings and results for the future geological services of Europe, and how can your 3D models improve our knowledge base there.
Well, you can use models, of course, and you can use it, as I said, as an example, how you could do cross-border harmonization. It's very important to set examples for different areas of different data coverage and also different kind of geology. We also were in the intramontaneous area in the Pyrenees, and I think if you have such new, it could be nuclei for further transnational projects, for example. So I think that's very important to have such an examples, and also examples again with different approaches and maybe different results and different level of harmonization. So that's important. That's why we produce so many reports, also that you can read in detail and follow in detail what we have achieved. So I think that's one of the amazing, but also other things like the uncertainty visualization. And we also produced a comprehensive report about fold harmonization. I didn't mention it here because the time constraint that didn't allow it, but it's also a very comprehensive report that could be used, I think, for others. So how could you harmonize folds across borders? That is also very important. And
okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah,
maybe also for Gregor and Cornelia, how do you see the importance of your work to support the geological services for Europe, the next step for us as geoscience community?
Do you want to go ahead, Gregor?
No, Cornelia, you first. And then I step in.
Okay, so we provided a lot of information that can be picked up from other geological survey organizations. So, for example, the methods that I briefly mentioned to estimate the resources, and about the fieldwork, we also got some lessons learned out of it that can be applied by further organizations. And then I think we lined out pretty well what is necessary for management of shallow geothermal energy in other areas. And this serves all as an example that can be adapted in further regions.
Thanks a lot. Niels, I think your presentation showed a lot about using the oil and gas industry, but what would be the importance, I think, also of your work for the future sustainable uses of the subsurface and the knowledge base that is available from the oil and gas industry?
Yes, thank you. I think it's been said many times that these data that has been collected from various sources is very expensive, and we have to make the best use of it. And for the offshore areas, in areas of where there's a lot of hydrocarbon exploration going on now or in the past, we are benefiting a lot from having probably the best, some of the areas where we have the best knowledge of the subsurface. And there's also a lot of existing infrastructures. So we have depleted oil and gas fields, and we have pipelines and infrastructure that can be reused. And that might be one of the future uses that we at least point at, that using these existing knowledge and existing infrastructure, that can be a major step quick ahead to actually move to storing hydrogen, or storing most likely carbon dioxide in these depleted oil and gas fields, and using, for instance, existing pipelines to just pipe it out, and thereby cut cost from this very considerably, and therefore making it much more likely to happen in the future.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Renate, maybe you can make very brief statements about the role of structural framework and the development that you have done for the future of the geoscience community and geological services for Europe.
Oh, wow, we have big ambitions for it, of course. But I think it was really, as I said before, an unprecedented effort to bring geological knowledge together in the same model for the many partners that we had across Europe. So we really hope this is the first step towards setting a best practice for the Geological Service of Europe, in a way, a methodology that we can easily use to really keep our knowledge up to and freely available to the public, to the stakeholders, to policymakers, and so on.
Well, thanks a lot. I would like to thank you all as project leads. First of all, a great collaboration we had in GeoERA and great products that have been established together. I think this is really a big endeavor which has brought us much closer with new first-of-its-kind products and novel concepts supporting sustainable energy in Europe's future green transition. So I would like to invite everyone again back, I think, to the plenary session, if I'm correct, Renate, where we have a panel session with the keynote speakers. Thanks a lot, everyone, for being here, and looking forward to meet you.
Thank you.